Greetings, friends and followers. This is Nurses Talking. I am Del Barzi. As always, if you like what you see and hear, subscribe, leave us a comment, and let us know what you think. Here on Nurses Talking, we speak to nurses anywhere in the world and at any stage in their nursing journey, from students to retirees and anywhere in between. And today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Sian Howells. Sian is a registered nurse that has worked on the same maternity unit for the last 16 years. She says she loves her job and her colleagues and attributes her staying power and resilience to owning her self-care. She also works as a This Naked Mind certified coach and helps people examine the role alcohol plays in their lives and how it impacts their health in a safe, non-judgmental way. She wants all nurses to feel empowered to question and explore all aspects of their well-being, free from labeling and stigma. So welcome, Sian.
Hi, Dale. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate it because I see that you are interested in a subject that, is really important that we talk about. But anyway,
Absolutely.
first of all, why are you a nurse?
Why am
What
I a
made you
nurse?
become?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to be a nurse from a very young age as a teenager. And I was really looking, I couldn't really put words to it at the time, but I wanted to be like in a caring role or a helping role. And I was really looking to be connected. And I actually worked as a summer I'm from the UK and we call it an auxiliary nurse, which is like a CNA. So I did that for a summer in like an assisted living facility, and I wasn't trained at all. It was a horrible experience. It really knocked my confidence. I was a 16-year-old trying to take care of people with like Alzheimer's with no preparation. And so I was just like, I don't think that's what I want to do. So I actually when I went to university, I got a degree in geology. So I have a degree in geology that I haven't used for one day. So when I graduated with that, I realized I didn't want to work with rocks. I wanted to work with people. And so throughout my 20s, I moved to a resort town and I just did a lot of customer service jobs, like working in a hotel, and I did a lot of serving and working in restaurants and that kind of thing that I really enjoyed. And so when I felt ready to look at healthcare again, when I was in my late 20s, I went back to college again, this time in the States, and I became a medical assistant. I just wanted to kind of dip my toe in and make sure that it was what I really wanted to do before I committed to nursing school. And I loved it. And I was like, I want to go further with this. So I became a nurse in my early 30s. So I did it when I was a little bit older, and I'm actually really glad for that. I did it when I was ready.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that is something that very often people don't get to do. They don't get to do it when they're ready.
Yeah.
They get to do it, very often because other people suggest it or because they weren't quite sure what they wanted to do or because, you know. So
Yeah.
when you got to it though, was it what you thought it was going to be?
Um, yeah, I would say it was. I was really looking to be connected to people, and you have quite an intimate relationship with
Mhm.
with your patients and their families and the people that you work with. So yeah, I'm so glad that I became a nurse. For me, it really was what I was looking for. I mean, and I'm really glad that I waited until I was older to become a nurse, where I was more prepared. I just had more
Yeah,
life experience, because now I can see myself being a nurse for the rest of my career. Whereas I think if I'd started when I was younger, then I wouldn't have stayed with it. I would maybe have only done it for a few years.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I love being a nurse. I think everyone should be a nurse. I have a son, I tell him he should be a nurse. Absolutely love it.
And so you work on a maternity unit. Is that the
I
only
do.
place you work?
It is. So when I was a medical assistant, I worked in an OBGYN clinic. And then when I went to nursing school, I actually had a really open mind. I wasn't necessarily only wanted to do OBGYN, but I went to the unit I work on now as a student, and I was just like, I want to work here. And I was able to get a job, excuse me, my senior practicum, or
Mhm.
capstone, whatever people call it. I was able to get that on my unit, and they hired me basically from that. And so that was just I just loved the culture of the unit right away. Like, the culture of the unit is really important to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I've done postpartum care. I've been there for a long time. I've done postpartum care, level 2 nursery, did labor and delivery for many years. I still do labor and delivery sometimes, but my main focus right now is our perinatal care unit. And so I do that most of the time. And so I take care of like long-term aunties and our high-risk
Yeah.
patients, high-risk obstetrics. I really enjoy that. I take care of a lot of patients with substance use disorders as well, and that ties in a
Mhm.
little bit, to my interest, when we're
Yeah.
talking about alcohol and nurses
Yeah.
using substances.
Yeah. 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 I can imagine as I'm listening to you talk about being on a maternity unit, and I'm becoming a little nostalgic. I became a nurse in the UK as well, and I
Oh.
became a midwife as well. Some of the greatest periods of my life being a midwife. But anyway, let's not get sidetracked.
Yeah, you
So
really see a lot.
yeah, you do see a lot, and also it's a so it brings you back every single time to just how fragile and how strong at the same time that life is, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so one more thing, is there anything that you think you would like to see change though with nursing?
I think we're seeing small changes. What I would really like to see come down are these new directives that we're getting from higher up, from the government level, about
Mhm.
really prioritizing nurse well-being. I'm
Mhm.
forgetting at the moment exactly the name of this initiative, but it's like the Surgeon General has been kind of trying to make everyone really pay attention to how
Yeah.
nurses are doing,
Mhm.
and not just nurses, other clinicians as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
a really big movement, and I'm waiting for it to trickle down. Like in my the system that I work in, we don't have a dedicated like wellness officer.
Mm.
I'm really
Mhm.
hoping that that's going to come. That's going to be part of the bigger plan, so that we can really start paying attention to this and have it be really normalized to talk about it. So it's not kind of a shameful thing, like, oh, if you're struggling, you need to go to a counselor, which of course has a lot of value, but that's very much behind this like shut door. You're
Yeah.
having this private conversation, whereas like, why can't we just talk about all this out in the open, like, all of the time?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And so that brings me to your particular interest, which is alcohol.
Yeah.
The prevalence of alcohol abuse,
Yeah.
use and abuse,
Yeah.
um, within our profession. First of all,
Yeah.
what made you zero in on that?
Well, for me, I had my own experience. I came, I'm from the UK, and so you understand the culture there and around drinking.
Hmm.
I came from a family where both my parents drank every day. It was every evening, I should say. It was very normalized to drink and have that be a way to unwind from the day. And so I grew up never questioning that. So as an adult, that's also what I did.
Hmm.
And then I chose my friends based on that. You chose your friends based on your shared interests, and that's like
Yeah.
going out for drinks, having a laugh. Chose my husband based on that. I was actually working as a waitress in a pub, and he was a customer. So, really my whole world was built around this very normal drinking culture. And, I was okay with that. I loved it. And I really didn't particularly want to change that. But what happened was, as I got into my 40s, I found that I was starting to have some like minor ailments. I was feeling, old, tired, irritable, all these different things that I kind of attributed to being middle aged. I had my son a little bit later in life. I was 38 when he was born. So I was like, well, of course I'm feeling this
Mm-hmm.
way. I have a young child and then, being in my 40s, my mum died, these big life things
Yeah.
that can
Mm-hmm.
happen. And I was like, I'm not doing very well. And, I just wasn't doing very well.
Yeah.
And I was having really bad sleep, just waking up multiple times a night, feeling very anxious when I was at work. Um, and when you look at like my problem list, when you kind of going in and like talking to your doctor, I had so many things on my problem list. And I had insomnia on there and all these different things. And I was like, well, it's perimenopausal, it's because I have a stressful job, it's because I have a lot of demands on me. And then what happened is that I started to wanting to pay attention to my health. Oh, I was overweight.
Yeah.
My skin was terrible. So I started to do some health challenges with my colleagues. And, I'd really just kind of poo-pooed that before. And I was like, I really want to start paying attention to my health. I'm only in my mid 40s. And so I started doing all these health challenges, and some of them included not drinking, which is something that I'd just always done. And
Mm-hmm.
I noticed I felt a lot better when I didn't drink. And that was new for me. That was completely new idea. And then in 2018, I actually did a dry January, like didn't drink for 30 days. And that was the first time that I'd really taken like an extended break from drinking. And I've been kind of thinking like maybe alcohol had been contributing to the way that I'd been feeling. But that by the time I was done with that 30 days, I was like, I can't pretend it's not alcohol anymore. And I didn't want it to be alcohol. I wanted
I'm
it to
about to
be
ask what's
anything
that
else,
card?
right? Because I was all about like, oh, I'm just gonna take I'll do some sleep meditations, I'll do acupuncture, I'll do anything except give up the alcohol because I
Yeah.
just couldn't imagine life without it because it was
Yeah.
such an important
Such a,
had such an
mhm.
important role in my life,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and that was both socially and just like that unwinding at the end of the day, like getting home from work and had that being the first thing that I did, because that was my transition. And I think that
Yeah.
is for a lot of people in
Yeah.
all jobs, not just nursing.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I mean, I would never, I still wouldn't say that I have an addiction or had an addiction, but there came a point when I thought to myself, well, I think I may have an unhealthy relationship
Yeah.
um with alcohol, not because I was not getting drunk. I was not being at least I don't think that I was ever being obviously adversely impacted, except that it became, as you say, part of your routine. And then I thought, well, it's only a glass of wine. Yeah, but it's a
Yeah.
daily glass of wine. And it's something that you're kind of coming to look forward to.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had to, take a look at that and say, okay, well, perhaps not like this.
Yeah.
That
I,
relationship needs to be a little more healthy. Hmm.
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I want to talk about is like how you can change your relationship with alcohol just because it doesn't feel good to you inside. It doesn't have to be that you're at the point where externally everyone can see there's a problem. Like it
Exactly.
can be just because you understand that that's going to make you feel better. And that can be a good enough reason. But the
Yeah.
trouble is, society doesn't give you permission to stop just because it's not serving you. People
Yeah.
will try and talk you into um, keep on going with it. And that's your friends, your partners, your just advertising,
Yeah.
everything tells you that this is a glorious thing and that
Yeah.
you'd be crazy not to do it. And I
Yeah.
felt that way at one point. I would hear about people that were they're like, well, I unwind after work by going for a run. And I was like, you're insane. Why would you do that when you could just have a drink? And now, now I see it really differently when I was able to really just understand how much it was impacting me. I mean, it's incredible, like health wise. I mean, so I hardly ever drink now, like maybe once a year. And
Mhm.
like you, I don't, I think this is why it's a really difficult conversation, a really difficult thing for people to talk about, because when we make that change, we feel like we need to defend ourselves. We feel like we
Yeah.
need to say, oh, well, I wasn't physically addicted to it. I wasn't, but I feel the need to tell people that. And
Yeah,
then I'm always
exactly.
automatically in a defensive position, where, emotionally and like, yeah, I was in some ways dependent on it, because part of that being because I understood that that was how you manage, your emotions, or,
Yeah.
so there's so much to it.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much to it. I was very fortunate, I think, very fortunate than probably many people, in that I live in a household where my husband is not a drinker. My husband is not a fan of alcohol on any level. Um, and so I didn't, it wasn't like I had that support. Once I decided, not that I was never going to have another glass of wine, I most certainly do, but it was not going to be the thing that I look forward to when I come home. It wasn't that hard for me in terms of what was around me. So, I realized that that's probably a little easier than many people who, that's their social thing. That's where they connect. Um, but so what made you become a coach? You became a coach.
I did. So I became a This Naked Mind coach. Um, so when I so when I was exploring, and questioning my relationship with alcohol back in 2018, I discovered this book called This Naked Mind. It's by a woman named Annie Grace. And it's just a different way of looking at alcohol and questioning it. And it's for people that just, you don't necessarily need to have the goal of stopping drinking forever. That's not what it's about. It's just about
Exactly.
making your own decision of whatever works best for you. And so that was really helpful for me. And also she had an online community that I joined, which was really helpful, because in my lived experience, I didn't have any support, and my husband continued to drink. He did it like the dry January with me, and then I was like, I want to keep going, and he was just like, well, I don't. I mean, then
Yeah.
there's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, yeah, and so I found that community, and then I was able to come to a place where I felt really happy with my relationship with alcohol, and I was so glad that I did it before the pandemic. Um,
Mm,
so so when I'd I'd not been drinking very often, but I decided to commit to a whole year alcohol free in 2020. And that was like the best decision I could have made, because because I felt really solid in that decision, that when things started to go sideways in March of that year,
yeah.
and I had friends saying to me, they're like, you're going to start drinking again, right? Because this is happening. They wanted me to join them in that.
Yeah.
There was this big, there was almost like a flurry of excitement, if you can remember, almost like we were having
Yeah.
a snow day or something, but
Yeah.
no one
Yeah.
realized how long it was going to
It
go
was great.
on.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I think there was a little bit of like, oh, let's have our quarantinis, and let's get through this. We'll be drinking together. And I didn't join in because I'd made that decision.
Yeah.
And then as time went by, I noticed my friends saying, "Oh, I'm drinking more than I was before," you know. And I also noticed that when I was at work, that I seemed to be doing a lot better than other people around me. Um, in that I knew I was getting good sleep, because for me that was a really big thing. When I took away the alcohol, my sleep was so much better. That was massive, and I was a lot more calm and just together basically when I was at work. And
Mhm.
that was even not even drinking a large volumes, even just a
Yeah.
small. It was like the more I cut back, the less tolerance I had. So even a
Yeah.
small amount
Yeah.
would make
Yeah.
kind of a difference. And so I just was so grateful that I'd already stopped drinking, because when I'd been cutting back, I'd already kind of had to learn replacement coping skills, because it was such an ingrained habit with me. It wasn't easy to
Yeah.
suddenly transition from work and not have a drink, because I was so used to it. So I'd already had to like do different things. Like I had like a substitute drink that I had that really made a huge difference for me. So like I trained my brain, that when I got home from work, like this was the drink that I was going to have. And my brain came to recognize that as the transition. Um, yeah, so I'd already been doing a lot of those things. And but still that transition from work still continues to be hard. I mean, I yeah, that's something I think that I'm always going to be working on. Um, but the reason why I decided to become a coach, and I just decided to do that last year, is because I was just hearing a lot of conversations
Yeah.
around me about people saying like, oh, I'm drinking a little bit more than I was, or and I wanted to offer nurses a safe place to talk about it. Actually, is the reason
Yeah.
why. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned the amount that you're drinking, because very often, well, not I don't know if very often, but I think we fail to realize sometimes that it's not always the amount, it's the
No,
relationship. It's the
absolutely.
relationship. I would never say that I was drinking a lot, because I still don't think so. But the relationship
Yeah.
is one that I needed to break.
Yeah. Yeah, we can really get attached to that idea of the
Yeah.
volume, and
Hmm.
then we're not really paying attention to what we need.
Yeah.
Because for me, like my husband, he drinks twice as much as I ever did.
Hmm.
He's a bigger guy, you
Mm.
know. Um, and so I could just say, well, I'm not drinking as much as everyone else. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine, because it was really negatively affecting me. Like I wasn't being the person that I wanted to be. And at the
Yeah.
end of the day, that's really all you can do for yourself. I mean, it's the ultimate self-love. And it's funny because I've never been the kind of person that would be like, oh, self-love. Like I would have found that to just be like really kind of like out there, or just like almost like self-centered, to say something like that. But for me, really pushing back against expectations of what I was going to do, and putting myself first was like ultimate self-love, and pushing back against my own expectations as well, because I was just like, what I strongly identified with a person that drank.
Yeah.
uh, you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. 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 That's it's huge. It's huge. So we in our profession, right? You talk about wanting to give nurses a safe place to talk about it in a non-judgmental way. But very often we don't talk about it, and we don't first of all, we don't even acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge it. And when we do acknowledge it, even to ourselves, even if we do it's a silent acknowledgement, what we feel probably is guilt, because we feel like, well, we're nurses, we should know better,
yeah,
right? And people say that too, actually. And it applies to us in any other kind of addictive behavior or other kind of stuff that manifests itself. For example, people talk about, well, she's a nurse, she's overweight, or what is it doing? She's drunk, she's addicted to drugs, she's addicted to this, or and so we don't talk about it. And so your idea of your purpose of giving nurses a safe place is, how do they find you?
Well, I do have a business. It's called Contents of My Glass. And the reason why I named it that was because when I changed my relationship with alcohol, really the only thing that changed was the contents of my glass. I was so afraid that my world was going to fall apart, that my husband would want to divorce me, and I wouldn't be invited by my friends anymore, and that that my dad would disown me. I mean, these were real fears. And I'm happy to say that really the only thing that I've changed is what I put in my drink. I still go out. I still go out and see music and go to restaurants and all these things. Um, and I still have the same friends. Yeah, so I named my business Contents of My Glass. So it's contentsofmyglass.com. And so what I'm really interested in doing is having some groups and to go through like a 30-day experiment together. And this is something that is done by This Naked Mind. But it's something that I can coach people through. And actually, I just did it in January, a dry January for some British police officers, actually, 150
Okay.
police officers. So what I would really like to do is kind of get this on a kind of like organizational level, where we can just have we can have an effort to just really normalize the conversation and say, hey, let's just experiment for 30 days. Either cut back or take a break or whatever you want to do, but let's do it and talk about it rather than this kind of 30-day break, which I first did when I did a dry January, which was basically in my pajamas. And so I had 30 days of not drinking and I felt great. But then when I looked at the rest of the year, where I was actually going to be like having social engagements and birthday parties and vacations, I was just like, this is impossible. I can't do it. So it's just about taking a 30-day where you can actually support each other and maybe have some experiences during that time and maybe go out to see some music without
Yeah.
drinking for the first
Without
time.
thinking. Mm-hmm.
you know but then you've got each other's support. It's amazing what a group can do to just kind of build you up and really kind of normalize your experience too. It's just like, oh, is it normal to be terrified of doing this without a
Yeah.
drink?
Yeah.
And it can make you feel like what's wrong with me? And that's where all the anxiety comes around, like,
Mm-hmm.
did that mean I have a problem? And that's when you start to label yourself, just because that's our common narrative in society. Like, either you're fine or you're an
Mm-hmm.
alcoholic,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
there's a big space in between where people aren't fine, but they're afraid to speak up because
Yeah.
they don't want to get labeled.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
I have a really tight friend group, and we have a book club together. And we actually had a dry book club in January, which has never happened before. Every member of my book club was doing a dry January, and I'm not going to take credit for that, but I hosted this dry book club, and it was amazing. Like, I couldn't believe it. I
Yeah.
absolutely couldn't believe it. It was such a big change.
Yeah. But, there are some very there really are, if you choose to look, some very delicious, satisfying, non-alcoholic
Yeah.
drinks. And you can really appreciate those, um, quite nicely and take the place of it. Suddenly you realize I don't really need that.
Yeah, it's amazing. No, it's really true. And there's some really great like non-alcoholic beers out there now. And I was never much of a beer drinker. I was more of a wine drinker. But
Mhm.
now if I go out and I have a non-alcoholic beer, to me, I'm just out having beers. Like, we have some friends, we go out for Sunday beers. I have my non-alcoholic beer. I'm just having beers. I don't even need to label it something
You
different.
don't need to label it. Exactly, exactly, exactly. I mean, and that's a really great space to be in.
Yeah.
Getting to the point where you don't even have to label it. You don't,
Yeah.
you can just
Yeah.
do what you do. Do what you do.
Exactly.
It's absolutely great. So to come back to I know we talked about that a lot, but to come back to nursing for just a little bit,
Yeah.
I have been noticing that I can identify a nurse without ever being told that somebody's a nurse. Very often I can identify a nurse. I see you go like this, so I know you can do it. And I started wondering, well, what is it that I saw that made me know that that person was, or made me think that that person was a nurse? And do we ever see it? Do we recognize it in each other? You know? And so I started asking, if you could describe the most essential quality of a nurse in just one word, what would the word be?
Mm. You know, I think an openness.
Openness. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I just find that, the nurses that I know, just they have to be open to everything. They have to be open to change. They have to be open to the idea that they might be completely wrong about something. Um, they just have to be open to like personal growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, I think openness. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I can think of a word that would make me know a nurse right away, but I do take care of a lot of patients that are nurses actually.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you're right, we just know, or maybe it's just because we just don't have to explain things in quite the same
I,
way.
I guess that's where the question actually arose, because I'm still not quite sure what is it that I recognize, or what is it that triggers in my head, whether in a social situation or otherwise, that that person is a nurse, So
Yeah. No, that's an interesting study. I'll have to, yeah, think about that a bit more.
yeah, but we recognize each other somehow.
Yeah.
But I'm glad, I want to thank you for doing this. And I'm really glad that you're talking about, I know you speaking particularly about alcohol, but I really would like us as nurses in this profession, I know it affects a lot of other people, but as nurses, to become aware of and acknowledge that there's a lot of addictive behavior
Yeah.
in our profession. And a lot of it comes from the fact that it is a stressful profession. We're only human. We need
Right.
something and some way to deal with the stress, with the highs and lows in any given day. You can be a yo-yo. You can be high this minute, low the next, high this minute, low the next. And there is a poem that I have that I read, and it's called 30 Seconds on a Hallway. And it's talking about nurses and the changes that you have to make from one patient to another within yourself. You left this room where it was probably, I don't know, what the news that was delivered to this particular patient was not good.
Hmm.
And you had to go across the hall to someone who has a totally different um, uh, perspective, a totally different set of news that they just got. And so you can't take this to that room. And in those 30 seconds that it takes you to go from here to there, you have got to change
Yeah.
what you're taking, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we see that on maternity. We've been working with one family that maybe their baby is critically ill up in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
NICU, and then we're going into a different room where they've got this healthy baby, and it's a big celebration.
It's a big yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And all of that takes a toll on you.
Hmm.
And we look for ways to deal with it, consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah.
We look for ways to deal with it. And some of that leads to this kind of behavior that leads to us not taking care of ourselves. And I was so glad that you said in your bio that you own your self-care.
Yeah, I do. I do. And that took me a long time. I mean, that was maturity, I think, that got me there. But and like what you're saying about, how do we deal with it? I think at the end of when we get home, as soon as we can, we numb it out. Or in
Yeah.
fact, if we can, we numb it out at work, right? Because there's
Yeah.
the room with the donuts and we're shoving
Mm-hmm.
a donut in,
Mm-hmm.
just to be like, just so I need to like block the thoughts for a
You need
minute.
to. Yeah.
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 And so when you get home and you overeat, or whether you're just drinking to just kind of numb it immediately, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately that feels good in the moment,
Yeah.
but the end
Yeah.
result is, you're actually harming yourself. And
Yeah.
um for me, when I would go home and, I'd be like, oh, I need to bring it down. And I have my, couple of drinks just to be like, so that I can go to sleep, basically. And at least that's what I told myself. That's why I was doing it, or just to have some relief. You're just looking for
Uh-huh.
relief.
Mm-hmm.
But then for me, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and every thought that I just pushed down would just come back like times 100, just amplified.
Yeah. 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 Your eyes pop open at 2 a.m.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
with all.
It's horrible. I think we've all had that feeling, just the adrenaline and the cortisol just like flooding our bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, it's really bad.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, owning my self-care was just understanding that this thing that I valued so much was actually making it worse. And
Yeah.
not to say I don't have nights now of broken sleep. I mean,
Of course.
I do, but the difference is like absolutely remarkable. And we only get this one life, you may as well live it feeling good. And only we can do that for ourselves. Like no one else can do that for us.
Yeah.
And I understand that, especially if we're working in these big systems like I am, you know, the the workplace has a culture, and sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
can be toxic or harmful. There are all these externals, and there's so much of it we can't control. We just can't control, and we can only control what we do, or how we cope, and
Yeah.
what we put in our bodies. Like, and we can blame other people for things, but it doesn't really get us anywhere. Like, it might be true,
Yeah.
but it doesn't actually make us feel better. And so that tiny part of what we can control or help with, it's worth doing it. I think I learned a statistic that, like, burnout, for example, and I think alcohol and burnout tie in together in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've been talking to with people, because I think we all know that burnout leads to increased alcohol use. But my
Mm-hmm.
question is, does alcohol use, this socially sanctioned coping tool, does that exacerbate burnout? Because then we're,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would love to learn more about how they are
Yeah.
intertwined.
That's kind of like a symbiotic kind of relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's just a one-way street, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no, I haven't been able to find any literature on that.
Mm.
I've been looking, because just through conversation with people that have experienced burnout, and this is in different professions, not just in nursing, they're like, yeah, once I stopped drinking, I was able to heal.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But this subject is just so big. There's just so much to say about it.
Yeah. Yeah. There is. And as you say, if we can just um remove the stigma, because that's not at all helpful, and it leaves people in a space that they would like to get out of, but just does not, they just don't have the way to do it because we
No.
stigmatize the yeah. Mhm.
We're in a horrible situation as nurses. So, I'm in the state of Oregon, and I think it's probably similar in other states, when we have to renew our license every 2 years, there's a question, have you had a diagnosis for a substance use disorder? or or have you had treatment or whatever, knowing that that question is going to come up, you're not going to speak up because you don't want to put yourself in that position. Like we've and these things might be changing, we'll see. There's a foundation called the Lorna Breen Foundation that is looking at changing the questions that are on credentials, and for physicians it can be even worse because they have similar questions but also just related to their privileges at the hospital. And Dr. Lorna Breen she was an emergency room physician that committed suicide in the early days of the pandemic, and I think she had COVID and she went back to work and just felt like overwhelmed, and she didn't want to ask for help because she didn't want to have to then declare herself to the boards and the everyone like that. She was really worried about being judged by her peers, and that's a real thing. We don't want to speak up and draw attention to ourselves. So that's when we're just like, I'm fine, I'm just here in my kitchen drinking my wine, that's normal. I'm just not going to say anything because we don't want to speak up and draw attention to ourselves, because there's so much unknown that goes with that that it's terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, but programs like yours should help us on the way to resolving this. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, just bringing it out into the open. Because when you normalize it, then we can question. That's the thing, if people are afraid to question and be like, I don't know, am I okay? I'm not sure, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything, because if I'm saying that I'm not okay, then I'm saying that I have a problem, and then that is a whole road I don't want to go down.
Yeah. And the thing is that the more you bring it out into the open, what the converse happens is that fewer people fall prey to this, because awareness, people become more aware more quickly of that they're heading in that direction.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, and it's understanding that it's a continuum, right? It's not this black and white, like you're fine, you're deep in addiction. There's a long way to get there. I just happened to get off the train early, but but there's a lot of people that who knows. Who knows?
Exactly.
Everyone's having their own different experience, but at least if we're able to talk about it, we can support each other and not have people feel like I only get support if it's really, really bad. Anything in the middle, there's nothing for me. So I'm trying to create that space where there's something for people that want to feel supported, because it's difficult to stop drinking. It's difficult when you have all those years of experience, and when you have all those social pressures.
Yeah. I can see that. I know that.
Yeah.
And especially when, as you say, we view it as a black and white thing, and you think to yourself, well, I'm not there. I'm not,
right.
And your denial is like, I'm not one of those.
Yeah. But why should you have to get there in order to deserve any kind of support, or
exactly.
Everyone deserves support, and to be able to have an open conversation no matter where they are with it.
Yeah, exactly. Sian, I cannot tell you how much I have appreciated and enjoyed this conversation, really, on several levels. Number one is because we very often don't talk about it, and it is so refreshing to have someone speak openly and candidly and freely about all of these things, all of us in one way or the other, because even if we ourselves in the profession are not doing it, you can be sure that you are working with someone who is.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to be there for ourselves and for each other. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, absolutely my pleasure. I've loved talking about it. Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure to have you, Sean. Thank you so much.